I'm Kelly Bowker. I am the director of design at EverQuote, which is an insurtech company based here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I've been here for almost a year now, but I've been working in design for about 20 years. So, um, the the running theory about 10 years ago was that I was in grad school so that I could run away and start my own circus. While that never happened, I continue to participate in circus acrobatics as a hobby, and my home has become its own circus because I have three small children and a dog. Today, I'm going to talk about how everything around us is communicating, even if it's not a smart device, as we've become familiar with. So, first off, let's align on what is communication. Communication, according to Merriam-Webster, is a process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, or behavior, also an exchange of information. It's personal rapport. It's information communicated, transmitted, or conveyed, or a verbal or written message. There are 5 types of communication, which I will go into in more detail. Verbal, what I'm doing right now. Nonverbal, what I'm also doing through my body language. Written, which you see on screen, also visual, and then what you are doing of listening. At the end of the day, or actually the start of the day, we're all on autopilot. What I would like you all to kind of take away with is understanding what are your communication styles? What are your comprehension styles, your comprehension skills? Where are you strong? Where are you weak? How do you observe the world around you? And so I really hope you kind of take away to understand, where do you communicate verbally? How are those nonverbal cues, like your body language, used when you're disinterested, excited, nervous? Um, when you're tired, when you're bored? Are you a good listener? Does that change over time? Can you write concise and clearly articulated messages? Are there barriers to how you communicate effectively, both personally and professionally? Is it part of your job? Maybe you're a copywriter, content strategist, product manager, engineer. Who's your audience? How do they comprehend what you're communicating? How do you comprehend it? And these all vary based on our backgrounds, our culture, our education, the language you use, the English, Italian, French, Spanish, um, or visual with sign language. Or as you know, those of us that are parents, the visual of our children having meltdowns, which all leads into our experience, direct, observed, those repetitive cues and patterns that we've been presented and have filled our minds and our mental models on how to interpret the world around us. So, the communication types, the first 2 are verbal and nonverbal. So verbal are the words, the caliber, the complexity that we use. Are we speaking at a 8th grade and above level of reading and comprehension? Are we speaking at a 6th grade level in comprehension? And is that necessity for the audience or for ourselves? What's the structure, the order of those words, the length of those words, of those sentences, and the intonation, the tone, the pitch, the stress, the cadence? Am I talking faster because I'm really nervous? Or am I slowing down and trying to tell a story so that you can immerse yourself and understand what I'm trying to communicate? And the environment impacts how we communicate. Those nonverbal cues, the facial expressions, the posture, the eye contact, my hand movements. Also, the physical closeness is also nonverbal, which we are more used to personally with friends, family, pets. And when it happens in a non-familiar relationship, can trigger responses and questions of like, why is this person so close to me? They're talking very close for those of us that are familiar and with Seinfeld, but also sometimes it's forced for those of us that are used to public transit and being on crowded metros and trains and buses. But then there's also in the professional area, those passive cues. Is the communication type, is this seniority of the peer in the room trying to communicate something? Is their experience, their role, the time that they're spending with me, the time it takes to do the communication, and then also that channel. Is it digital? Is it physical? Is it in person? Is it over Zoom? Is it virtual in some manner? Is it over the phone? And how do those environments, that ecosystem, impact the effectiveness of what we're trying to communicate and what we're trying to comprehend? The communication types. They're obviously written. I have my slides here. I also have my notes in front of me. Our goals for that written communication is to avoid communication, can avoid confusion, embarrassment, and also legal jeopardy. We have footnotes. We have the idea of contracts we sign here, yes, I agree to cookies, no, I don't agree to cookies. Something that we need to be more aware of is in this digital age, our messages live on, perhaps in perpetuity. What's the risk to that? So when you're writing, remember, write well, write with intention, review it, evaluate it against intent and desired perception by your audience now and in the future. We obviously don't always have time for that or this foresight to think about what we want to be perceived as in the future. But if we're all a little bit more diligent in how we're communicating, what we're communicating, and why we're communicating with it, hopefully our end goals can meet the value that we're trying to get across, and the comprehension on our audience side move more in our direction as needed, as appropriate within the space or the product or service that we're trying to share. With visual can we kind of anchor to this idea of, well, it's pictures, it's movies, it's billboards, it's ads, but it's more than that. The lighting in my room is visual. It can be dark, it can be color toned, it can change, and those colors imbue a certain type of information. I'm going to go to a nightclub and listen to jazz, and so the lighting of the space is communicating that it's supposed to be relaxing. I'm supposed to be paying attention to the stage. Similar with movie theaters versus my children go to school. The lighting of their rooms need to be bright and airy so that they can observe and hear and see and engage with their classmates and their teachers. The imagery of movies associated with sound, those patterns, those movement, all of the feedback notifications that we get, those are visual cues that we have been trained to consciously and subconsciously on what we expect. The color of a button being red, the color of a button being gray communicates whether it can be interacted with and it's an error or warning, don't perceive, don't pass go, or you can't interact with this. And at the same time, there's also around 20% of our population that can't inform or divest and understand what color is trying to use. So we need a combination of different types of communication types in order to be most effective in our messaging. Last, not normally considered as part of a communication type, but active listening. I learned the listening triangle from my grad school professor for negotiations intensive, Moshe Cohen. He wrote a whole book on the value of negotiations called Collywobble. So this is from him. I've used it effectively within research, sometimes effectively with my children, but definitely very effectively within my professional career. And so the reminder of this is provide your full attention to the other party. And the other party can be static report. It can be a book, but you are not going to be able to fully comprehend, to fully take in and evaluate that knowledge that you're getting if you don't give it your full attention. Sit with the information that you've taken with. Kind of evaluate yourself, question yourself. How am I interpreting what's being communicated to me? Is it effective? Is it not? Would it get value through additional artifacts, through graphs, through pictures, through sound? How can I get the most out of what I'm trying to take in from the other party? And then when it is a two-sided conversation or three-sided conversation with a group of people, communicate back what you think they're trying to tell you. Sit with that and then communicate back and say, I heard you say this, and this is how I'm interpreting it. The common example that I like to work with is, say you are the manager of a hotel, and the owner of the hotel comes stomping and into your office and says, we need 2 pools. Manager A is just like, okay, I'm being told I need 2 pools. I'm going to go planning board and figure out, how do I get in the second pool? Manager B is like, wait, why is he telling me I need 2 pools? And so you sit with it and you're like, okay, well, we have a pool. What about the current pool is not like meeting your expectations? Why are you running into here with this expectation and this desire and this order to have a second pool? And then through that conversation, going around and around through the listening triangle, you learn you don't actually need a new pool. He has a high value important on like the business clientele who spend more money, who are more frequent than the family clientele. So you don't need a new pool. You need very clear pool hours. So you need a sign, you need rules, you need behaviors to change. And you get that through aligning on communication. So we're going to play a little game. I normally run this as a workshop, so virtual, we'll see how it does. Physical example. You have a traffic light. I'm getting told that it's green. The patterns that we grew up with, even if I am red-green colorblind, I should have learned by now that at least in most of the world, not Japan, the bottom circle is green and that means go, but the traffic's not moving. So what do? I lean on my horn. I am now giving a physical cue to my car that it needs to then give a verbal cue to the rest of the environment around me. Eventually, traffic moves and I see there was an accident. And then luckily nobody's severely hurt, but the person that then had the accident was a cyclist. Their helmet is giving them a nonverbal cue that their helmet is now damaged. They have to take that information in and make a decision. Do I go get a new helmet? Do I potentially have a concussion? Do I need to see the hospital? They are trying to make heads and tails of all of this feedback, all of this information swarming in at them through a non-verbal communication cue. Next. I love ice cream. I have children, but even if I didn't have children, I love ice cream. So this one has a written communication type. It has a nonverbal communication of here's the flavor, here's the cone, here's this physical object. You are then getting feedback as the person handing the child the ice cream of a successful experience because they're happy, they're smiling. Unfortunately, at some point, the ice cream drops. And then you're getting both verbal, visual, and nonverbal cues through there to understand that they are sad. And so then that is your cue to understand, to engage with them, to figure out how can you comfort them. Could you try and find out how to get another ice cream? Do you move forward because you can't get ice cream? What are the ways you take in all of this information unconsciously because of the patterns and experiences we've had in order to figure out how to move forward in order to have a successful end? Putting it in the professional space, as I said, I'm a director of design. I've worked as a product manager, I've worked in a variety of industries, but at the end of the day, whether I'm leading a team, I'm doing the design work, I'm partnering with product, I'm partnering with strategy, the point I always anchor to get across, to communicate to my peers, my stakeholders, my leadership, is that design at the root is the intentional arrangement of things to create a better experience and outcome. And that could be the arrangement of my desk and my space in my house. It could be in the arrangement of a workflow, of content on a page, the arrangement of a radio ad against other ads and communications in preparation for a sale or open enrollment because we work in insurance and other things like that. It's understanding the ecosystem and the order of operations and placing those in a way and accessible that makes the entire experience better for the business, because that's the business's goal, but also for the end user. How do I go about that the most? I leverage diagrams. Here is an activity diagram example that an old direct report of mine, Hannah, made. She found great success in aligning with engineers and product through using diagrams because it takes away that bias and anchorage of the visual artifacts where things become very personal through the aesthetic preferences and gets it down to more black and white types of decision making of what are the steps, what are the tactical steps, how long does it take there? So the example we used was Jane needs a less expensive way to light her business. She has a lot of different options to do that. How did she figure out that she needs the less expensive light her business? Through budgets, through communication. And so her options are either just like, okay, let me cut back on the usage. I'll change my hours. I just won't use this business space as often. I'll evaluate different electric providers. Is there a standard cap? Can I get discounts? What other areas? Or do I just switch the lighting? In addition to maybe the other two. It's not a one versus them type of scenario, but in this example, it's simplistic. So she looks about at a different provider, she learns about pricing, and then has a decision point. Is the pricing less expensive? Yes. Happy path ideas. I enter my credit card, and then the website runs the card. We are skipping over the fact that she would have to kind of do the closing, so she has a comparison digit decision point. But this is very simplistic given the time here. Or she doesn't, so she needs to exit the website and return to the start of that evaluative process, the understanding what cues, what's communicating to her, and how she can resolve that situation. On our side, our goal is to then use those diagrams, to use then those visual artifacts, to use that research to communicate to stakeholders, to design the full experience. So we're designing those activity diagrams, that processing, those steps, the capacity, the throughput line, understanding what are must-have engagement, what hasn't, using those kind of static and processes. Do we need to add in additional access to different types of support? Is the support automated? Are we using learning models? Are we using live people? Is there a time frame? We have to think about all of this both before and while we release our products and our services and our features. As designers, as product managers, we are building ecosystems. We are managing ecosystems. It is no longer the days of when I was early in my design career where I was designing brochures and it was a static thing. And once it got printed and mailed off, I had no more control over how the person engaged with it. I had some based on how I designed the pamphlets and the leaflets and the pages and the content, but it did not force a way to engage and obtain communication and understand the information we're doing with it or what to do. Within digital experiences, there's a lot more forcing functions, but there's also a lot more noise. And so I encourage all of you to be intentional with this work. So at the end, what I would like everybody to take away from with this in order to improve both your communication skills and your comprehension skills are self-reflection. The more self-aware you can be of your audience, who you're talking to, how you perceive your audience, how your audience perceives you, the content that you're providing, the format, the modes of communication. Is it written? Is it visual? Is it verbal? Is it nonverbal? Is it a light flashing? Is it repetitive? The channel, is it digital? Is it over the phone? Is it over radio? Is it word of mouth? Any other kinds of areas? The timing, the frequency. Do I set a schedule, a calendar for this communication to go over and over and over? What's the objective? Is there a lifespan to it? Also the behavior. There's the physical kind of behavior cues. There's also digital cues. How do we react when we get a message from our boss over Slack in email at like 10 p.m.? Are you reactive? Does it create a sense of nervousness and urgency? Or do you just turn off notifications so that you don't run the risk of that? At the start, you have to be first self-aware of how you engage with the world, how you communicate with the world. And then next, practice your writing skills, practice your verbal skills, practice your interpretation, ask for feedback, over communicate, especially in this digital world where we are more connected, but also more separate given the remote environments, the Zoom calls, the Google Meets, all of these spaces that both make it easier to communicate and connect, which also makes us more passive and less engaged. Align with your partners, with your peers, with your stakeholders through that listening triangle. Give space and trust to respectfully disagree in order to then figure out what is it okay or how to gain alignment or compromise in order to move forward, and document all of the processes going forward, the agreements, so that there's not confusion. Because again, we are overwhelmed with information every single day of the week, every single moment. And so, if without that documentation, you run the risk of repeating those missteps, those miscommunications over and over and over again. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kelly. It was really interesting kind of take on, I guess, looking at a bit more of the science behind some things like user journey flows and that. So it was great. Thank you very much. Um, so yeah, as I said at the start, if you have any questions, please do feel free to post them on whichever channel that you're watching this on, and I'll put those questions through to Kelly. But to get started, one of the things I always think about and I've done so many kind of be better at active listening and those kind of things, is when I'm communicating, communication is just such a natural thing for people that you don't even think of it as communicating. So I'm never intentional enough when I'm doing it. So do you have any tips or tricks that can kind of make people a bit more intentional instead of just slipping back into old habits?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been listening to more podcasts lately because my children are slowly older, so I can handle the noise, the continued noise in my head. And I was listening to a really great episode on Diary of the CEO about how we're getting ADHD wrong. And what stuck out to me is that we're distracted all the time. But the primary catalyst to distraction is our own internal need to avoid pain. And so that was eye opening. It was like, oh, wait, yeah, I'm trying to avoid pain a lot. Like I escape into my phone and read articles in order to avoid the discomfort of like my children being loud. And so I've built those habits subconsciously in order to avoid pain and discomfort. And so it goes back to what I was saying of like self-reflection. If you can find time in a day, in a week, to like keep track of those moments where you got distracted internally, you start to recognize the external cues or events that lead to you kind of becoming disengaged. And sometimes it's by accident. I, at the start of every meeting, especially when I'm kind of solo parenting or something, I remind people, hey, like I have my phone on, I'm going to get distracted. It is just like, even if it's a moot point and obsolete, it's going to happen and I apologize. And so it's kind of that more transparent process of being honest with ourselves and with each other of we're inundated with distractions in order to help create a safer space to have that forcing function to get back on track. Because I think the risk now is more, to your point, like communication, we just do it, we're on autopilot. But if we don't feel more comfortable calling each other out, calling ourselves out for when we don't communicate effectively or we don't listen effectively, then it's going to continue down that negative path. And we're going to have less engaged relationships or less valuable relationships.
Yeah, I love that. It kind of I love the phrase somebody told me before, they're an experienced beginner. And what they meant by that is they have a lot of experience doing something, but they're still a beginner at it because they've never taken the time of self-reflection, which is how you really learn, which is kind of how did
Yep.
I do that? What could I do better? So at communication, a lot of us are experienced beginners.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't really until I started having children that I realized just how poor of a communicator I was. I could give my kids who are like elementary school age and my design team the exact same instruction of like, go make a picture of a building. And I would get vastly different results because of difference in skills, different of experiences, difference of mental models. My team might prod and be like, what kind of building? Is it eco-friendly? Is it Renaissance? Is it this? Whereas my kids are like, oh, here's a house. Here's a tree house. Here's like a rectangle. And that's just absolutely fascinating to me, is understanding just how big of an impact our experiences are, our subconscious frameworks have on our ability to effectively communicate and then comprehend the world around us.
Brilliant. The other thing that jumped to my mind when you were explaining kind of using a user journey flow as a tool for communication, do you always think, because you mentioned so many different forms of communication, I really like the concept of the Amazon six pager. I don't know if you're familiar with that,
Yep.
but they've actively advocated against PowerPoint and visuals and more for just dense text to kind of cover it.
Yeah, I have had to write the Amazon six pager. I have had to write essentially longer ones of that. I was interviewed recently on a podcast where I talk about this. I have had to write the longest papers when I was a product manager than when I was in grad school. I might at some point get a PhD and write a dissertation. And I love reading. It is one of my favorite hobbies. I hate reading documents in the professional world. Give me bullet points, give me lists, give me something that's scannable and digestible. Help me understand the meat of this, because there's only so many hours in the day. And the longer that I have to read, and if point A is at the start and then point B is like 3 pages down, my effectiveness on being able to connect those two goes down because my energy decreases over time. I think the act of writing those papers is a really effective tool, but expecting other people's to give the same amount of care and time and attention for all of those six pagers, especially when you think about the sizes of teams and who has to make decisions, it falls over pretty fast. And so I love PowerPoints. I love bulleted lists. I've used bulleted lists in like personal emails and have gotten called out by my mom and my aunts for it. Like, nope, this is for fluffy stuff. So that's where the point of know your audience, know yourself, know your perception of your audience and the audience's perception of you, because there are going to be times where it's just that's the expectation of the job and you have to write it. And the act of writing it, I fully agree, is like helps you get better at then articulating the point when you're in the meetings later, because what is the likelihood that your peers, your stakeholders, once in the meeting to, thumbs up, thumbs down, or push for more information, have read all of those. They want those bullet points. And so like that then cements the information in your head more, because if you're practicing the content, it's all about like, where do you spend your time? Where's the risk? And then what is the expectation of those that are asking for the communication tool, for the artifact, for the document? I definitely warn my team on getting into visuals from a mock-up perspective, from an experience perspective too early, because then you always have somebody that anchors to something that was like a fluffy idea. And they're like, well, where was that star and the automation and things? And you're like, well, we don't have the infrastructure for it. It's a vision work, like sometime in the future. But we want it now. And so you have to play those politics and those battles. And that's why like documentation is key, but understanding what the usefulness, the utility, and the point of that documentation comes first.
Brilliant. Well, that actually brings us perfectly to time. So I just want to thank you once again, Kelly, for sharing your insights.
Excellent. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.